Welcome to the Old Mac Gang podcast, or OMG, a podcast with a panel of longtime Apple Mac users who want to discuss the most relevant apps and services to age-seasoned users. I'm Marty Gensius, an Apple enthusiast and podcaster. I'm a 67-year-old age-seasoned user who has collected a great group of friends to talk about Apple and the use by seasoned citizens. Let's see who's with us on the panel tonight.
Hello, I'm Chris. I'm 77. I've been around the Mac since 1984, and I spent 9 years with the Apple user groups in Dallas, the Mac Pack and the Apple Core of Dallas, and then I was a member for a short time in Austin with the Capital Mac user group, and where I started working for Apple, worked there for almost 9 years, and then finished my career in the Bay Area at a major university doing IT support, mostly on the Mac. I've been retired for 8 years now and live in Tucson, Arizona. I'm a happy member of the Tucson Mac user group after meeting Bob, who you'll meet in a minute, on jury duty, which is another story. And I'm currently using an M1 Mac Mini, an iPhone 16 Pro Max, Apple Watch Series 6, a 9th generation iPad, and lots of Apple services.
Hi, I'm Peter. I'm 72 years old, and I'm from Bay Village, Ohio. I'm a loyal member of the Northeast Ohio Apple Club. I've had a long life as a foundryman, and after that, a shorter life teaching high school math and stats, and now I'm getting the hang of retirement. I got my first MacBook Pro in 2006 after an Osborne CPM machine and several PCs. At the moment, I have an M4 MacBook Pro, an M4 iPad Pro, an iPhone 16 Pro Max, and a 9th generation Apple Watch as my primary computing devices. And I use them all a lot.
I'm Gary Shirk. I live in Cleveland, Ohio. I'm a member of the Northeast Ohio Apple Group, where I met Peter and Marty. And then by meeting Chris and Bob, I joined the Tucson Mac Users Group and found them a very interesting group of folks. I retired in 2004, moved back to Cleveland, found two Apple clubs. I use primarily a Mac Mini, M1, iPhone 14. I have a watch and a few other things.
Okay,
Bob?
so Bob, yeah.
Hi, I'm Bob Wood. I'm in Tucson, Arizona. I'm an officer of the Tucson Macintosh User Group. I have been in user groups since the early 90s and an officer for much of that time. And I think that that is a good place to not only learn, but to give back to your community.
All right. We've got a roundup group tonight. And today just happens to be, we'll produce this so it will be out today. But today just happens to be the day that Apple released the newest member of the family, is what they call it. And I thought, okay, so newest member, does that necessarily mean an iPhone, or are there going to be some other goodies that happen? Because you think of a new family member, you think not necessarily this, a twin or something like that. You think of a new product. Well, it wasn't a new product line, but it was the iPhone 16e, which people were saying is going to be called the SE4, or is it going to be called the 16 SE or the 16e? Well, they settled it with 16e. We're going to talk more about that in a minute, but Peter and Chris both came up with this article, and I'll switch to the article in a minute so folks can see it. It's actually it's actually a YouTube video, so there's not as much to see about it, but it's about Amazon and how they're gonna not let you download your books anymore. Peter, do you want to start with that and give us a little background on what that is and what it means?
Well, for me, it probably means I'm not going to buy any more books from Amazon. I mean, I think I should be able to have a backup of anything I own or license, and I've always uh, downloaded my Kindle books and pulled the DRM off them, so just to make it easier to handle and do different things with, like extract text or search and do lots of other things outside of the Kindle apps. I mean, I kind of knew this was coming because several months ago, uh, they made it harder to sideload books onto your Kindle. Now you have to email it to them and they do some conversion and put it in your library. And so I suspected they made some file format changes. So they just want to control the DRM. And the only enticement they have for me now is the fact that when you're reading a book on your Kindle, and if you're also listening to it on Audible, many of the books will synchronize between the two. So if I leave off listening and want to, my Audible app will be at the same spot and I can continue listening. And if I stop there, then I can go back onto my Kindle and I can continue reading from there. And there are times where it's more convenient to read or more convenient to listen. And I like that. So maybe if there's a book that I particularly want to do that with, I will do it. But I'll probably buy EPUBs from another source, and there's other places that sell EPUBs. Bookstore.org, which is an association of independent bookstores, is selling ebooks now, and it's not too hard to sort of remember what chapter you're at and end at the end of the chapter and go back and forth between Audible uh, and an ebook. I still have a way to download Audible books and make backups of those, so I'm still going with their audiobooks.
So I have lots of questions just from what you've said. So you're downloading, what file do you download? What's the extension on it? Is it, because Chris and I were talking about this before the show. It's not an EPUB, I assume.
It's
Is it a,
not an EPUB. There are two different extensions. Well, it actually depends on the provenance of your Kindle book. Really old ones were Mobis, MOBIs,
yeah,
and then there's a couple of different Amazon AZW
right.
formats, and those were what you could pull off, and uh, with the right software tools, you could take care of the DRM and then convert it back and forth between different book formats. Now, whenever you convert between formats, you might lose something. Okay, so there
Hmm.
might be some feature on one, but you get, the basics, which is the reflowable text, the resizing of the text, the bookmarking, some of that stuff. I mean, there are a lot of things where Amazon is quite sort of, I want to say lame brain, because it's an insult to, you know, to differently abled people. But, you know, you can get highlights from the crowd. You highlight something, it goes into a crowdsource, it shows you what other people have highlights, and you can turn those on or off. If you choose to highlight a book, something I've been loath to do in real books, because then the next time I read it, I'm stuck with what I thought was important the last time I read it, which I find
Hmm.
disconcerting. But I thought an ebook would be great because I can highlight stuff and go locate it easily. But if I want to just have a pristine reading experience, I want to turn them off that same way. And Amazon doesn't let you do that. And I can't tell you the number of times I put that in their suggestion box. And I know other people have as well, and they have not exceeded that. I'm hopeful that with Panos Panay, the guy from Microsoft, leading their charge, that might be some new good thing that he chooses to do. We'll see.
So removing the DRM, I guess, would be considered illegal by copyright standards, but then there are those that would argue, well, I own the damn thing, so
It
Why can't I
Well,
remove the
right.
DRM?
I would say it's a somewhat unsettled part of the law. I mean, obviously, if you're a lawyer for Amazon, you would say, no, it's perfectly settled. You can't do it. And if you're a lawyer for someone else, uh, you might think otherwise. But it is something, there is case law that says you can make a backup of
Mm-hmm.
something you own so that people who have devised tools for like backing up DVDs, for example, have prevailed in court saying, yes, you can make a copy of that. Or you want to use it in some other way. Okay, I don't want to go stick a DVD in my computer every time I want to watch one. I guess I'm pretty lazy. I want to have a hard drive in the bedroom that's got all my DVDs on the hard drive and then pick the one I want and air it. And I don't want to be at the mercy of, you know, Hulu or Netflix or all the different things of saying, oh, this one's gone now. It might be coming back next year. The movies I really love and like rewatching, I want to rewatch at will.
Mm-hmm.
And there's lots of movies that are not available on the streaming services, just like there's lots of music that's not available on Apple Music or Spotify or things like that. So if you're a collector type, you want to maintain control over your media and easy access to it too. I mean, I would certainly not copy and sell or copy and share or do anything
Mm-hmm.
like that. So I don't think I'm on their radar as a person that's creating trouble for them.
Okay, so I'm going to create a little good trouble. And by that I mean, without divulging any types of software that does this, I presume if I was interested in removing DRM, I could search the internet and find something, a piece of software that I could put the file through and it would do it. Am I correct with that
Yeah,
assumption?
since sometimes there's more than one step. Okay, so I think it's not impossible that I'll still be able to remove the DRM from Kindle books because essentially you can create software that's going to control the Kindle reader, on
Mm-hmm.
your computer, open a page, turn the page, turn the page, turn the page, and go through the whole book and pull all the text off the pages and reassemble it. You know, uh, I don't think that's so far away,
Yeah.
and I've certainly done that manually with some things that I've had photographs of every page and pulled the text off of it and made something searchable from books that I want to use as references, like mathematical textbooks. And I've successfully not only pulled all the text, but converted, let's say, 90% of the equations into correct uh, equation formatting stuff, which is the most common is called LaTeX.
Yeah. So I'm curious, anybody else on the panel have a question or a comment on this?
Maybe a
Yeah.
question. Peter, do you think what we talked about last week with legacy and the potential of leaving our Kindle books or our Kindle account to one of our kids someday, maybe that's not going down well with Amazon's attorneys, that they didn't foresee this as a possibility originally?
I don't think everybody thought about it right away. I mean,
Hmm.
uh, I certainly have known people who have, transferred the passwords and so forth to their account, and you can change information on your account. I know people who've given their accounts on various licensing services to their kids, and uh, the and then used their kids' subscription for a while, and I know one who's passed away, and they're still using it. So
Yeah.
uh, I don't have extensive knowledge of that, but I certainly think that's possible. But I mean,
You
I
know,
think
Lance,
if you pass away and then you're trying to get the count and then change the name, I think that's going to be a different story than doing it thoughtfully ahead, the same way people create trusts and put things in trust for their kids, long before they pass away. People who think ahead probably can hand more stuff to their kids.
We talked about that last week in terms of legacy, and also the news that Apple was allowing us to combine our Apple ID accounts, and we thought, well, this is some great possibilities here in terms of getting our material. And then Friday they did a follow-up news release that said, yeah, you can do it, and we've already given you news release on how to do it. But then here are all the conditions you have to make sure are in place in order to do it. And it turned it into what appears to be a rather complicated project to get it done. So they're still not making it easy. They're making it available, but it's just not as simple as pushing a button and combining two accounts without any constraints. So, one last thing I'd say about this is one of the arguments that they make in this video is it's shifting our thinking to we thought when we bought this stuff it was ours, but it really isn't. We're renting it. But if we want to continue to use it the way it's set up now, and particularly when they removed the download aspect of it, if we want to continue to use those materials, we have to have this relationship with Amazon. So we have to have an Amazon account. We have to access it through Amazon stuff. So it's a permanent marriage. It's a marriage that you can't get divorced from. And that's kind of a disturbing concept too. That we went there to buy the product, and now we're stuck with the delivery service in order to have it happen. So interesting thing to think about.
Yeah, I
Well,
don't think
Marty,
the
on the
push
other hand,
to.
go ahead, Peter.
I was going to say, I don't think the counter push to what Amazon's doing is going to be a direct counter push in terms of we want to be able to copy this. But I do think it's going to come in the same way that right to repair, is something that Apple is slowly acceding to, even though they want a very tight control over the hardware. It's going to be a right to reuse or to use the content of the book in different ways is probably where there'll be some concessions made by Amazon, I would presume. And some
And
of
I
it
can
may
see
come from academics and stuff like that. I mean, it may start out with being able to do accessibility screen reader kind of stuff to make a lot of things more easily used by more people.
Yeah.
well, the original license was one copy, one user. And to the extent that they see that being threatened, where, we could leave it to one of our kids who gives it to the other kid and so on, their siblings, all of a sudden you've got multiple copies of the original. They're obviously going to have angst about that.
Right.
So,
But from what I've heard from their public statements, they do accede to the fact that I have my Kindle and I'm done reading a book and I give my Kindle to my wife and say, now you read the book. They don't seem to have a problem with that. So
or
having a
my wife
family
reads
Kindle,
my wife
right,
can read my Amazon Kindle books on an old iPad that I don't use anymore, but it's available
right.
to her anytime she wants to. So, and vice
Or
versa. So,
I could buy a second Kindle and sign on and then give it to my wife, and she has access to all
There
of
is
our
a
books.
limit on the number of devices that can
Yeah.
access a Kindle book, and that goes by publisher. That's not an Amazon policy. So you might have one publisher that says there can be 3 copies out there at any one moment, and there are other publishers where the limit is 10, for example.
Yeah. Well, thank God I don't have 3 wives.
Well, you might find out you have, when you replace your Kindle and you go look under your Amazon devices, you might see that, the old 3 of your old Kindles that you no longer use are still there,
Oh yeah.
and whatever you put on those are still being counted.
Yeah, and 3 of my old wives are using them. So let's get on to the topic for today. And I know I asked folks to post some ideas about it. Bob put some ideas up, and he's been quiet for a while here in this area. So the new iPhone 16e was released. Well, not released today, but orders start Friday morning at 5 a.m. Pacific time. In order to order them for the following Wednesday. Any reactions to this? And Bob, if you want to start, I'm just going to the kind of showing the website that is apple.com/iPhone-16e. It gives you the specs. It's an aluminum
Great.
frame. It's not a titanium frame. Bob, I'm sorry.
Okay. It is my contention that there is no one size fits all smartphone. I know that several people on this group have iPhone Pro level phones. I have a 15 Pro, and that's a good fit for me. But I think that there are certainly use cases and people who would like a phone of lesser expense. And I think that the 16E fits that well. This phone will be right for some, but it won't be right for others. The price is good for a first phone starting at $600. The display is the same size as my 15 Pro. So for seasoned citizens using this display, it is not a tiny screen, such as the previous SEs were. It has a A18 chip, and it has a 48 megapixel camera and crash detection. And I'll come back to that in a minute. And Marty asked, who is this phone for? I believe this phone is for someone who is not iPhone centric. On this group, I know that Chris Wesselman is pretty iPhone centric. I am not. I'm more Mac centric. But it is not for someone who is a self described photographer. The fact that this phone has the new Siri and Apple Intelligence, and much can be done with voice commands. Therefore, a senior with some shake in their hands can still get much out of this phone without going, I want a P and I got an E or whatever.
Yeah. See if anybody else on the panel, your reactions or take on it.
Sure.
I could make a comment on the camera situation, and I'll say up front that yes, I have the 16 Pro Max, and it's one of my 3 cameras. The other 2 are Nikon's. One is a crop sensor, the original Z50, and the other is the Z5 full frame. But I use all of these pretty much equally. So what's missing on the camera on the 16E is the telephoto, which is a 5x now on the Pros, and it's kind of snapshotty. In other words, you can use it to get stuff, but if you're looking for anything kind of pro level, like you're shooting wildlife or anything like that, you really need to go to a big camera. Okay, it's not the same quality that you're going to get at 24, 48 millimeters. The other thing that's missing is the wide angle or the ultra wide. But you know, a lot of people don't shoot that because you get parallax effects sometimes with walls leaning in or leaning out, depending upon whether you're shooting up or down. Mm-hmm. But the core camera on this is nothing to sneeze at. This is a really good camera, and it is a 48 megapixel sensor, and it can double up as either a 24 or a 48. I don't think you get quite the resolution on the 48, but I mean, this camera could be absolutely sufficient so that, if it's, say, an eighth grader's first iPhone, which apparently happens a lot in eighth grade, or depending, maybe somewhere seventh grade. You're not breaking the parent's bank account, and you really do get a pretty decent camera for most shoots, especially people shots, basic landscapes, and stuff like that. So it's just a word on the camera. It's not bad at all. It doesn't. It only has one lens, but so did my iPhone XR, and which was a 10. And Bob and I. That's one of the first things I did for T-Mug was an evaluation of my iPhone XR, and that camera really was just as good as what I got on the 14. So anyway, enough on that. But that's
Yeah.
some thoughts on the camera.
Yeah. I jumped the gun with Bob a little earlier this morning, and I didn't really know that much that the 16 SE was out. And from what Bob said, I would agree with him that, Chris, I don't see a lot of even seasoned seniors taking that much of pictures. I don't. I just take selfies or for people that I want to show friends and my kids what's going on. And then I wasn't aware either of the Face ID, which I find extremely helpful. So therefore, I am agreeing that this is a phone that seniors would look at and find that very useful. Even
Yeah.
though I have a 14 Pro Max, but I ended up getting that just because it was the biggest, and have way over more than I need, and so that's my take on it, Marty.
Yeah, I was disappointed. The reason I was disappointed was because I really wanted the price point to be $500 and below. And they added another 150 on the phone. And it is different to get it up to that price point. It stops becoming the value that the previous SE is. But you look at the components that are in it, and I can see why they probably couldn't get that phone at the previous price that you would have to keep it within that market with all the components that are placed in it. So I go back and forth on it. I have one phone with two lines. I'm tempted to get this second phone and put the line on that because nobody calls me anymore. Nobody calls my phone. They message me. And if I can put my Apple ID on this new phone and get my messages through there, then I have a reduced price phone. I don't shoot a lot of pictures. If I'm going to do stuff, I'm going to do stuff in spatial because of the Vision Pro headset. But frankly, for traveling and going to Macstock this summer, losing or having stolen a $600 phone versus a $1,400 phone is a big difference. So I'm kind of looking at this as a possibility of a traveling phone. I wish it was smaller. I don't like the fact that it's expanded to 6.1, but $150 more. I might look at it and get one just to play with for a while and then sell it back when the new iPhone comes out or it comes out in the fall. I don't know. Got a lot of good stuff. Facial ID. The camera is good enough for me for what I do, and it's got Apple Intelligence. So that's where I sit with it. I agree with a lot of what Bob has said. This is a good phone for starters. I think if you think of our mug groups, there are people who are going to be looking at a new phone. Eventually, some of them should have looked at a new phone a long time ago, but eventually they look at a new phone. This is a good phone for them and maybe within their price point. I just wish it was sub 500 as the previous SEs have all been. So
The S part, it's not small. It's got the E part, it's an economy phone. It's a entry level phone, and I think Apple sees it as part of the family of 16s, and that means they're going to update it every year. Uh, I don't know what they'll do for a lower price phone. I would assume they would tell you you should buy a model from a previous year, but I don't think that satisfies the people who really like a small phone. And I have friends, including ones who aren't seasoned citizens, a lot of kids I know, they prefer a smaller sized phone. It fits in their pocket better. They can grip it better. And I think Apple needs to come up with a smaller sized phone. The SE wasn't updated every year, was it? I think it only was
No.
updated
No.
every 2 or 3 years, wasn't it?
Yeah. So the idea then too is, I thought about that. Now it's locked to 16. It's not locked to an SE number. It's locked to 16 as an E. And does that mean we're going to see a 17E and an 18E? And this is just a broader spectrum of phones that we're going to have released every year, which makes interesting changes in terms of pricing. I mean, which ones will they hold on to, and then they cut $100 or $200 off? With previous years, could be interesting.
Well, two things that could be factors here. One, it's the first iPhone with the new Apple produced modem chip, the C1. And I don't know how that impacted price either way, but it's also got visual intelligence using the action button.
Yeah.
And so you can press that. And if you haven't tried that yet, it is predicted to be a killer feature. Because you've seen the ad where you pointed at a restaurant and it gives you the menu and the hours and all of that kind of stuff just by pointing at something. And you can, some of the things around the house it'll know, but particularly if you see some gadget in a store window, you could click on that, get the price and all of that good stuff. I don't know if adding the action button, if that added to the cost, that could have been a factor, because you need that to get the visual intelligence, because you've got to have a pushable button.
Yeah,
So
but they
there may
didn't
be
have
some other factors involved.
They didn't add the camera button, the extra camera button. That's
They did
separates it
not.
out.
They did not add the camera button. That's absolutely right.
Yeah. Which
But
has
a
been
lot of
kind
people
of
won't miss it.
yeah, which has been kind of an enigma. People are struggling with making that thing work right for them.
I don't
on the
always use it. I use it.
Yeah.
It's very handy in some situations, and other times it's just easier to tap that shutter button that's on the screen.
Right.
So
Yeah.
it's kind of mixed, and actually moving between settings with that slider is also kind of mixed. People are having mixed results. I mean, for me, a lot of times it's the exposure compensation, the EV value that I'll adjust in the picture, and that's easier to do on screen. But anyway, don't want to rabbit hole here, but
Yeah.
just some thoughts on that.
And you reminded about the Apple's first new modem in this phone, which I think is pretty cool. That Apple is now taking that part, and curious about how it works, and curious if it does get to some of those Wi-Fi levels that we don't typically see in phones, or that are sort of next gen Wi-Fi. I haven't looked at the specs on it, but it'd be interesting. I will look at that because I'm curious about it. I want to go back to one of the questions that was posed as we move through this. Do you know someone who could benefit from this? And Bob, you had some ideas about that.
Yes, I do. My wife and I have a friend who lives about a half hour away. She is now a widow, and she is someone who should not be driving. But she continues to drive. She likes her independence. And whenever she cracks up a car, she just goes out and buys another one. She has, I believe she does not have a landline phone. She only has a cell phone, a flip phone, as it were. And she just recently got a new phone that does do texting. And I think that she could be a fit for an iPhone 16e, because not only she's kind of shaky and not very mobile, again, someone who should not be driving. So she has an Android phone with texting. She doesn't use the texting very much, probably because she's not used to texting. It's not in her head. And she probably has trouble finding the right button on the glass keyboard. If she had a text to speech phone, i.e., Siri with Apple Intelligence, she could do an awful lot more. I'm sorry, Siri, I wasn't talking to you. Um, she could do texting a lot more easily, and she could do other things. One of the other features that would be good for her to have is the crash detection, because it's going to happen again. And to the point where if she ever comes over to our house for dinner, I don't want her driving out here and driving back. One of us will go pick her up, bring her out here, and then drive her home again. Because if she got into a bad accident on her way from her house to our house, we could never forgive ourselves. So this is someone who could fit the profile of someone who might benefit from a 16E. Sorry if I tripped anybody's S lady accident.
Well, Bob, the other strategy would be for you to drive over and pick her up and then have her drive back with your car and smash it and then buy you a new car. You're just not working this right. Chris, I think you had a comment.
On the more serious side, as somebody who does have a little shake in his hands, stylus pens can work wonders. I started doing this with Duolingo, which I do for a couple of languages, and the interface is best on the phone. I'll just leave it that the iPhone app isn't as good as the phone app. And I found I can move through it much faster with a stylus. And it's just something about hitting the keyboard with this is a lot easier. I've got a very solid, although it's a somewhat soft interface on the phone, and it works great. So us seniors need to try it. You can pick up these phones and just turn them over and tap on the phone. It's a great interface. Apple never included one. Samsung does, but just something to consider. So, Bob, when you get her that phone, when you get her the 16E, get her one of these pens at the same time.
Only
my
after
wife-
she buys me a new car.
Yeah.
Oh, there's a deal.
My wife has macular degeneration. And so she now does all of her texting through microphone. That's how she communicates her texts back and forth with folks. Just because also the small keyboard, and what I need to do and what she and I need to do is kind of really fully explore the accessibility options for her, because even on desktop computers, the color differences are a little bit too weird or too different. So setting up contrasts that might work for her and things like that. We've had those conversations. But yeah, the voice to text is really also another remarkable part of the system. Gary or Peter, anything else to say in terms of who can benefit from this or ideas about the phone?
No.
Okay. A couple more pages to show you, and this will be part of the show notes in both the podcast and also in the video cast. There is I watched this pretty good review of the 16E versus the iPhone SE3. So if you're going along that E function, this is really a pretty good comparison between the two cameras and explains the two cameras pretty well. I've got some articles that I've thrown in. One is Best Cell Phones for Seniors in 2025, tested and reviewed by text experts. This comes from seniorliving.org, and it has some good examples of phones, their ratings, their pricing, and reasoning behind that. And then New York Times Wirecutter did a article February 10th, 2025. The best cell phones for older adults. and it goes through 5 different phones, including the iPhone right up top. They also do the Google Pixel, and I've owned a Pixel before. Very great phone. They talk about the Lively, and the Lively has some great functions to it. And then the other phone that I thought was really interesting that helps folks with memory capabilities and memory issues is this phone called the Raz Mobility Memory Cell Phone. It's a Motorola, apparently, but it has designed for people with more advanced cognitive decline. This is a kind of a caregiver managed phone that gives the user options to connect with families and friends. And then for really, really old school, you want a non-smartphone, nice little thing you can hold in the palm of your hand just to take calls, the Snapphone Easy 4G. So those are a couple of articles. Again, we'll post them to the show notes in both the video and the podcast version of the show. And I think that's a wrap for tonight. Thank you all for doing this. And our next live episode will be a week from today on the 26th at 9 p.m. through YouTube, where you can watch us and the crew at youtube.com/@oldmacgang. You can always pick up the podcast or video later if you miss the live show. Share it with your Mac user groups. Share it with other people who are seasoned citizens who use technology. Our music bed is by Philip Gross, Marrakesh, courtesy of the Free Music Archive. More information about this podcast and others can be found at thepodtalk.net. Thanks to Gary, Chris, Peter, and Bob. And I'm Marty. Thank you for being part of the Old Mac Gang, and see you next time.